This is the story of Elena, about to give birth to a bouncing baby boy. Elena sits in a moment of vulnerability. She is clutching her swollen belly, surrounded by sparse. Her face, marked by exhaustion and sorrow, emphasizing the emotional weight of her situation. The atmosphere is filled with an ominous stillness, the soft light and dark red hue blending together, intensifying the sense of desperation and loneliness. When she got pregnant, she was abandoned by the man she loved with all her heart. Tears streaming down her cheeks, her eyes reflecting a deep, emotional storm. Her gaze shifts toward the empty space beside her, the memory of the man who abandoned her weighing heavily in her thoughts. Her expression is raw, as if her very soul is laid bare, struggling to reconcile the past with the future. The entire moment feels haunting, capturing Elena's internal battle as a single mother, standing on the edge of an uncertain future. No wonder after giving birth, she was always cradling her newborn son Aiden in her arms, her eyes filled with a deep, protective love. Elena's gaze is unwavering, locked on Aiden's innocent eyes, as she silently vows to protect him from the world. The expression on her face is a mix of fierce determination and tender affection, revealing the quiet strength she is prepared to offer him. The story begins during Elena's childbirth. Elena is seated on a wooden chair, gripping her swollen belly tightly as pain contorts her face. Sweat glistens on her forehead and drips down her cheeks, her expression a mix of exhaustion, determination, and vulnerability. The atmosphere is tense and heavy, capturing the weight of her isolation and the life-changing moment she is enduring. Elena was taken to a small village clinic where she gives birth. A midwife leans slightly forward, her expression calm yet focused, as she gently hands a crying newborn Aiden to an exhausted Elena, who is lying on a simple hospital bed. Elena's face is pale and drenched with sweat, her body language revealing both relief and exhaustion as she weakly extends her arms to receive her child. The newborn, wrapped in a clean white cloth, cries loudly, his tiny hands curled into fists. The father, Victor, came to the hospital, denies responsibility for the pregnancy, leaving Elena heartbroken and alone. He walks away angrily, his stiff posture and quick, determined strides emphasizing his frustration. Behind him, Elena lying on a simple hospital bed, her face filled with desperation as she gazes at him, one hand reaching out in a silent plea but could not stop him from leaving. Elena in her grief clutching baby Aiden tightly against her chest, her arms wrapped protectively around him, her hands trembling slightly, while her tear-streaked face reflects a mixture of overwhelming love, sorrow, and fierce determination. Baby Aiden, wrapped in a light, soft blanket, nestles quietly against her, his tiny face serene, unaware of the emotional storm surrounding them. Elena silently vows to shield her child from the world. Elena standing by a window illuminated by the soft, flickering glow of candlelight, her silhouette partially framed by the warm, golden light. Emotional flashbacks of Victor rejecting Elena add depth, showing her fear of loss. Elena, just like all mothers out there, starts to create rituals with Aiden from infancy by rocking baby Aiden in an old wooden chair, singing softly with a peaceful smile. Elena's expression is tender and loving as she gazes down at her baby, wrapped in a soft blanket. Elena continues by, sitting in the bathtub with Aiden, looking at him with a loving smile, her wet hair falling loosely around her face. Aiden, now a joyful toddler, playfully splashing water in a shared bath with Elena in a modest, cozy bathroom, unaware of the repercussion of this. Elena and young Aiden often cuddling closely under a handmade quilt. Elena's joyfully leans protectively over Aiden, who rests his small head on her chest, creating a tender and heartwarming moment. There was no ending to these rituals as these continues every day. Elena overindulges Aiden, refusing to discipline him. She pampers him with toys, treats, and undivided attention. This behavior sets a dangerous precedent for his emotional dependency. They cook together with a smile. Aiden, even as a toddler, usually holds Elena's hand tightly with a possessive grip, his expression one of innocent determination as if declaring she belongs only to him. Elena stands beside him, her face showing a mix of love and amusement. As time passes by, Elena, now 30 years old, and Aiden, now a cheerful 5-year-old boy, their connection grows even deeper while Elena continues to pamper Aiden, not knowing the implications. Neighbors started to notice Elena's intense bond with Aiden. Several nosy neighbors, mostly middle-aged women, peeking discreetly through a window with a judgmental gaze, gossiping about Elena. Their faces are partially obscured by the curtain, but their expressions are unmistakably filled with curiosity and disapproval. In the foreground, Elena can be faintly seen through the glass, engaging in an activity with Aiden, completely unaware of the gossiping eyes on her. Also in the village, a group of villagers, a mix of men and women of various ages, gathered under a large, sprawling tree. The group is engaged in hushed whispers, with a few individuals pointing discreetly toward Elena's house. The expressions on their faces range from curiosity to mild disapproval, and their body language suggests they are engrossed in gossip. As soon as Elena walked past a group of villagers gathered under the large tree, the villagers immediately stand in small clusters, some leaning toward one another, whispering, while others boldly point at Elena and Aiden. Elena holds Aiden tightly by the hand, her posture straight and determined. Aiden clutches her hand possessively, looking slightly confused but trusting. Elena's face shows a mix of quiet defiance and focus, her eyes fixed ahead, ignoring the whispering and pointing of the villagers behind her. Aiden's possessive attitude starts at 5 when Elena went to a village gathering without him. Aiden throws a tantrum while lying on the floor of a small, cluttered living room. His face is red and tear-streaked as he screams, his fists clenched and pounding the floor in frustration. Around him, a few scattered toys and a tipped-over chair reflect the chaos of the moment. Elena, visibly tired but calm, stands nearby, her expression a mix of patience and quiet resolve as she watches him. Elena did not discipline him. She dismisses it as normal behavior. Elena kneels on the floor beside Aiden, who is still lying on the floor amidst the tantrum, with his small fists clenched and tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. Elena's face reflects a complex mix of frustration and guilt, her brows furrowed and her lips pressed tightly together as she tries to find the right words to calm him. One hand reaches toward Aiden gently, while the other rests on her knee for support. She is still unaware of how she is fostering Aiden's emotional instability. The next day, Elena stands near the doorway, one hand on the doorknob as she glances back with a conflicted expression. Aiden clings tightly to the fabric of her dress and also supports the door with his hand, his face pressed against her leg, tears streaming down his cheeks. His tiny hands grip the material desperately, as though letting go would mean losing her forever. Elena's expression is a mixture of heartbreak, her posture suggesting hesitation as she balances her responsibilities and emotions. Aiden becomes so sad. He sits on a narrow windowsill. His small frame is silhouetted against the rain-speckled glass, through which a rain-drenched street stretches into the distance. Drops of water trickle down the pane, mirroring the sadness in Aiden's eyes as he rests his chin on his knees, hugging them tightly to his chest. His expression is distant, a mixture of longing and melancholy, as though searching for answers in the gray world beyond the window. Elena, still having some old pictures of Victor, decided to burn them. She stood in front of a dimly glowing fireplace, her face illuminated by the flickering amber flames. In her hand, she holds a photograph of Victor, the edges already curling and darkening as the fire consumes it. Her expression is cold and resolute, her eyes fixed on the burning image, a mixture of determination and finality etched into her features. The warm light of the fire contrasts sharply with the icy resolve in her gaze, casting dramatic shadows across her face. This moment captures the symbolic act of letting go and reclaiming her strength. Upon seeing this scenario, Aiden, now 6 years old, looks up with wide, curious eyes, his innocent yet probing expression illuminated by soft, natural light. His lips are parted as he asks, "Who is my father?" Elena's face looks confused, revealing her uneasy expression. Her eyes dart slightly, betraying a mix of guilt, pain, and hesitation, as though searching for the right words. Elena, still bitter, refuses to discuss Victor. This fuels Aiden's belief that his mother is all he needs. Aiden starts school but struggles to connect with peers. In a schoolyard filled with children laughing and playing on colorful equipment under a bright, sunny sky, Aiden sits alone on a worn wooden bench in the corner, his small figure slightly hunched, holding his lunchbox tightly. His expression is heavy with sadness and longing as he watches the other kids from a distance. He is always absent from class and always disconnected even in his present. A teacher noticing this development decides to talk to Elena. She invited Elena to the classroom. A well-lit classroom with rows of small desks and colorful educational posters adorning the walls. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with a concerned expression, stands near the chalkboard, gesturing toward an empty chair in the middle of the room. Elena, dressed modestly but neatly, stands across from the teacher, her face a mixture of worry and attentiveness as she listens. After the meeting with the teacher, Elena wanted to leave the school premises, but Aiden, with a tear-streaked face, clutches Elena's hand tightly with both of his tiny hands, his knuckles white from the grip. Elena looks down at him with a mix of sadness and reassurance, her free hand gently touching his shoulder instead of scolding him and telling him to remain in his class. Aiden further becomes possessive of Elena and often leaving school early just to be with her. Later that evening, Elena decided to bathe Aiden. Aiden sits in an old-fashioned bathtub with water splashing gently around him. Elena, kneeling beside the tub, holds a small cup and pours water over his head. Both wear faint, uneasy smiles, their expressions hinting at an undercurrent of tension amidst the tender moment. Steam rises softly, and the light from a small window casts a gentle glow over them, emphasizing their connection. In a twist of even, Aiden refuses to bathe alone anymore, insisting Elena shares his bathwater like she did when he was younger. Elena was very uneasy on his request, but she complies out of guilt. Elena, wearing simple undergarments, a plain bra and panties, stands at the edge of the tub. Her body language exudes hesitation, and her conflicted expression reflects an internal struggle as she debates stepping into the bath. She finally enters the bathtub to bathe with Aiden. In another turn of events, Victor, after so many years of neglect, unexpectedly arrives in the village. Victor came to Elena's house, standing at the doorstep of Elena's modest city home during the late afternoon. His posture is firm, his hands clenched at his sides, but his face reflects a mix of determination and regret. Victor's eyes convey an unspoken apology as he hesitates to step inside, the tension of the moment palpable. Elena partially opened the door to see Victor partially visible through the narrowing gap, his face frozen in shock and regret. Elena slamming the door in Victor's face, her trembling hand gripping the doorknob tightly, veins visible under her pale skin. Her expression is a mixture of anger, pain, and resolve as she pushes the door shut with force. Victor started whispering, demanding to see Aiden. Elena refuses, fearing his presence will destabilize the fragile world she's built. During this intense and emotional moment, Aiden was peeking cautiously from behind Elena. His young face is a mix of confusion and anxiety, his wide eyes glancing toward Victor, who stands just beyond the door. Elena, noticing that Aiden was peeking, stands protectively in front of Aiden, her posture firm, creating a barrier between him and the man outside. Fast forward to the future. Aiden, now 10, begins controlling Elena's schedule. He insists she doesn't go out without him, subtly manipulating her time and choices. Aiden, now visibly upset when Elena told him she was going out alone for a visit. He angrily knocked over a large ceramic vase in the corner of a small yet cozy living room. The vase is caught mid-fall, with shards and water beginning to scatter on the floor, while the flowers it held spill out in disarray. Aiden's face is flushed with anger and frustration, his body language defiant as his tiny fists clench at his sides. In the background, Elena stands stunned, her hand frozen mid-gesture, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. The warm tones of the room reveals emotional storm unfolding within, emphasizing the clash between love and misunderstanding. Elena was terrified and confused. Her elbows rest on her knees as she buries her face in her hands, conveying exhaustion and emotional turmoil while sitting on her bed. Beside her, Aiden stands near the doorway, his small frame tense, his arms crossed, and his face set in a defiant glare. The atmosphere is heavy, with the faint glow of a bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. The disarray of the bed and scattered belongings hints at the chaos of their strained relationship. Later that day, Aiden, sitting cross-legged on the floor of their living room, is seen furiously tearing up Elena's outing calendar with red-marked dates clearly visible on the shredded pieces, the torn pages scattered around him. His face is flushed with anger and frustration, his small hands clutching another piece of the calendar mid-tier. Elena stands near a table, her expression a mix of shock and sadness, frozen in the moment as she watches her son's outburst. Later that year, Victor files for custody of Aiden, claiming Elena's overattachment is harmful. Victor stands in a sleek and modern lawyer's office. He is dressed in a crisp suit, his posture firm and confident as he leans over a polished wooden desk. With one hand resting on the desk, his other hand points directly to a document labeled "Custody Petition" in bold, black letters. His expression is resolute, a mix of determination and regret. Across the desk, a lawyer sits attentively, wearing glasses and a neutral expression, their pen poised over a notepad. Elena, weary yet with resolute demeanor, sits on the edge of a worn-out sofa in her modest living room. She clutches Aiden tightly against her chest. Aiden, with wide, innocent eyes, looks up at her, sensing her unease. Elena's expression is a mix of fear and fierce determination, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she gazes toward the front door, as if bracing herself for an unseen threat. The bond between mother and child is palpable, a quiet moment of protection and love amidst uncertainty. Elena is ready to fight back, claiming Victor is unfit to take custody of her child after abandoning them for a decade. Later on, Aiden sits at a wooden desk in a softly lit room, surrounded by scattered crayons, pencils, and paper. He is carefully drawing a picture of himself and a girl, Elena, holding hands under a bright blue sky with a shining sun in the corner. The words "Only Us Forever" are written in bold, colorful letters above their smiling figures. Aiden has a look of focused joy on his face, and his cheeks flushed. The next day, as the confrontation between Elena and Victor continues, Aiden crouches behind a partially open door in a dimly lit hallway, his face a mix of anger and betrayal. His sharp green eyes narrow as he listens intently to a muffled phone conversation coming from the next room between Elena and Victor. The soft glow of a bedside lamp spills out, illuminating part of Elena's figure as she sits on her bed, phone pressed to her ear, her expression unreadable from Aiden's vantage point. Aiden has clenched fists and furrowed brows reveal the intensity of his emotions, while the shadows around him deepen the tension of the moment. Aiden overhears the custody battle. He tightly holds the hand of Elena, and his intense green eyes lock onto hers with a mix of defiance and vulnerability. His brow is furrowed, and his lips are pressed into a determined line as he says, "I don't want a father." Elena looks back at him with a mix of surprise and concern. His words solidify Elena's belief that she must protect him at all costs. During another court session, Victor sits at a polished wooden table in a tense courtroom setting. His blue attire slightly rumpled, and his clenched jaw reveals barely contained anger as he crumples a piece of paper in his hand with force. His piercing brown eyes burn with frustration, fixed on an unseen figure in the distance, presumably Aiden. Around him, the courtroom is alive with hushed murmurs. A judge's gavel rests prominently on the bench, and rows of spectators blur in the background. Aiden, due to these troubling circumstances, begins having nightmares where Elena leaves him. Aiden woke up, sits upright in his bed, his face drenched in sweat and twisted in fear as he wakes up screaming from a nightmare. His tousled brown hair clings to his forehead, and his wide green eyes are filled with terror. Because of his fears, Aiden sneaks into her room every night, sleeping by her side. Elena, full of guilt but with compassion for her child, allows it. The next day, Victor came to visit Elena again. Victor and Elena stand on a wooden front porch bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun, locked in a heated argument. Victor gestures emphatically with one hand. He offers to drop the custody case if Elena agrees to let him see Aiden weekly, his face flushed with frustration and his green attire slightly disheveled. Elena refuses, escalating the tension. She stands her ground, her arms crossed tightly over her chest and her brows furrowed in defiance. Their intense exchange creates a charged atmosphere, visible even from a distance. Inside the house, Aiden peeks through a slightly parted curtain at a window. His small face is pale, and his wide green eyes betray a mix of curiosity and anxiety. Victor extends a court document to Elena with a resigned expression. His shoulders are slightly slumped, and his tired eyes avoid direct contact, reflecting quiet defeat. Elena, standing opposite him, hesitates as she reaches for the document, her face a mix of surprise and apprehension. Elena, with fierce determination in her eyes, enters her house, kneels beside a crackling fireplace under a darkening sky. Her face is illuminated by the fiery glow as she watches a court document curl and blacken in the flames. Her hands are steady, holding the paper just above the fire before releasing it. One sunny afternoon, Elena went to the market to get some groceries, unknowing to her that Victor was also in the market. The bustling marketplace was alive with chaos as villagers argue passionately in groups, divided between supporting Elena and siding with Victor. Some villagers gesture animatedly, their faces red with emotion, while others stand with crossed arms, their expressions resolute. Elena stands at the center, her posture firm, her face determined yet strained as she listens to both sides. Victor stands nearby, his hands folded against his chest, observing the conflict with a calm but guarded expression. The marketplace is filled with colorful stalls, hanging fabrics, and scattered produce, with the midday sun casting strong shadows and illuminating the tension among the crowd. The next day, Victor shows up unannounced to take Aiden. Aiden, with tears streaming down his flushed face, stands in a dimly lit room, his arm extended mid-throw as a glass object hurtles toward Victor. The object catches the light, glinting dramatically as it arcs through the air. Aiden's expression is a mix of rage and anguish, his mouth open as he screams, "I hate you." Elena is forced to restrain Victor from taking Aiden away. Victor stands a few feet away, his face frozen in shock and his hands raised instinctively to shield himself. The emotional intensity is palpable, with shattered pieces of the object visible on the floor. After the incident, Elena becomes even more protective. Elena kneels and hugs Aiden tightly, wrapping her arms around him as he clings to her, his face buried in her shoulder. Her eyes are filled with both love and defiance, glistening with unshed tears. In the background, Victor stands stunned, his face a mix of shock and regret. He's frozen mid-step, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides, as though unsure how to approach. That evening, Elena, her face soft with love and reassurance, leans in close to Aiden, who is sitting beside her by a crackling fireplace. She whispers softly into his ear, her expression tender yet resolute. Aiden looks up at her with wide eyes, his small hand resting in hers, a quiet sense of comfort in his posture. Aiden was so joyful after this reassurance and protection. He sits at a small wooden table, focused on drawing a picture of himself and Elena. His small hands grip a crayon as he carefully sketches the outlines of the two figures, a heart surrounding them. His face is full of concentration, with a slight smile tugging at his lips, a reflection of the affection he feels for Elena, his mother. The paper is spread out before him, filled with simple but heartfelt drawings. Elena's neighbor, Zoe, begins noticing strange behaviors in Aiden. Zoe, a woman in her 30s with sharp features, stands near her window, peering through the blinds with a look of suspicion. Her brow is furrowed, and her eyes narrow as she watches Aiden from a distance, her lips pressed into a thin line. Aiden is visible outside, standing in the yard, unaware of Zoe's gaze. Zoe, standing in the middle of a quiet street, confronts Elena with an accusatory expression. Her arm is extended, finger pointed firmly toward Aiden, who stands a few feet away, looking uncertain. Zoe's posture is rigid, her face contorted with anger and suspicion as she speaks sharply. She pointed at Elena and cautioned her to be wary of her actions and the after effects. Elena, standing her ground, looks back at Zoe with a calm but defensive expression, her arms crossed. She warns Zoe to stay clear of her relationship with her son and accuse her of being too nosy. Elena, with a fierce look of determination on her face, walked away and slams the door shut with force, the sound echoing through the quiet air. Her body is tense as she stands on the other side in her living room, her hands still gripping the door handle, eyes narrowed, breathing heavily due to anger. Zoe stands outside, frozen in shock, her hand outstretched as if she were about to knock again. Her face is filled with frustration and disbelief, her posture rigid as she walks away. In a bid to move on with her life and forget about Victor, Elena starts seeing an old friend, Thomas, which triggers Aiden's jealousy. Elena and Thomas sat across from each other at a cozy cafe table, bathed in the warm glow of hanging pendant lights. Elena, dressed casually, is seen laughing, her face radiant with joy, while Thomas, with a friendly smile, gestures animatedly. The two share a light-hearted moment, their connection evident in the ease of their conversation. However, unknowing to them, Aiden secretly followed them to the cafe. Outside the cafe, Aiden watches through the window, his small face twisted in a scowl. His hands are pressed against the glass, his eyes narrowed in frustration as he observes the scene. Elena starts feeling suffocated by Aiden's dependency, but doesn't know how to distance herself without hurting him. Unfortunate for her, Thomas asked for him to visit her at home. Thomas came to visit Elena at home and tries to create a connection with Aiden. Instead, Aiden, with a mischievous glint in his eyes, deliberately knocks over a drink, sending it spilling onto Thomas's open notes on the table. The liquid splashes across the paper, staining the carefully written pages. Aiden's face shows a mix of satisfaction and defiance, as though he knows exactly what he's doing. Thomas, sitting across from him, looks stunned and frustrated, his hands raised in surprise. The focus is on the spilled drink and the ruined notes, adding a layer of tension. Thomas, wearing a warm and patient smile, extends his hand toward Aiden, attempting to engage him in a friendly conversation. His posture is open and welcoming, exuding kindness. Aiden, however, stands with his arms crossed tightly across his chest, his face twisted into a glare. His stance is defensive, clearly uninterested in Thomas's attempt to connect, resulting to an emotional tension between the two. In the night, Elena could not sleep due to the incident between Aiden and Thomas. Elena, sitting on her bed, her hands covering her face, her posture slumped in exhaustion, her body language reflecting the weight of her emotions, the tension and fatigue from the day clear on her face. She thought about avoiding Thomas for her son's sake. She felt confused and didn't know what to do. In the background, Aiden sleeps soundly on Elena's bed, his small body curled under the covers. The peaceful scene highlights the contrast between his innocence and Elena's weariness. The room is cozy, with simple decorations and a feeling of quiet solitude. The next morning, Aiden, with wide, sleepy eyes, grip onto Elena tightly, his small hands clutching the hem of her shirt as she attempts to sneak out of the house for a short walk. His face is filled with a mix of confusion and clinginess, still half asleep but instinctively reaching out to her. Elena, in her comfortable clothes, looks down at him with a soft, affectionate expression, her hand gently resting on his head as she tries to reassure him. The early morning light filters through the window, casting a calm glow over the room, while the tension of the moment adds warmth to their bond. Later that day, Elena picks up her phone. Elena's face, her expression filled with anxiety as she gazes at her phone. Her brows are furrowed, and her lips are slightly parted, showing her concern as she sees missed calls from Thomas. The screen of the phone reflects softly in her eyes, heightening the tension. Her hands grip the phone tightly, but her posture remains tense, caught in the moment of decision. Victor, disturbed by the rumors of Aiden's upbringing, decided to warn Elena that her parenting is creating an unhealthy attachment in Aiden. Victor and Elena met on a dusty village road, with dry earth and sparse vegetation stretching around them. Victor, with a stern and firm expression, gestures toward Elena, his hand raised in warning as he speaks forcefully about Aiden's behavior. His posture is commanding, and his eyes are intense, conveying his seriousness. Elena, standing a few feet away, listens with a mix of concern and frustration. Her arms are crossed, and her face shows the emotional strain of the conversation. Elena, with a calm but resolute expression, walks away from Victor, brushing off his concern with a subtle wave of her hand. She moves confidently, her posture strong and determined, while her eyes remain focused ahead. She dismisses him, but his words linger. Aiden, holding tightly onto her hand, walks beside her with a possessive grip, his small face set in defiance as he gazes back at Victor. His other hand is clenched into a fist, showcasing his protectiveness over Elena. The background shows the dusty village road stretching behind them, with the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the scene, enhancing the tension between the characters. Aiden, feeling happy and sitting at a wooden table, carefully cuts out pictures of himself and Elena with small, precise movements. His face is focused, eyes slightly narrowed in concentration, as he works meticulously on his scrapbook. The room around him is quiet and simple, with shadows stretching across the walls, adding a sense of solitude to the scene. Aiden's obsession of Elena grows as he consistently tries to stop his mother from going out alone without him. On this faithful day, Aiden, with a determined expression, reaches up to flip the switch on the front door, locking it with deliberate precision. His small hand firmly presses down on the lock, showing his intention to secure the house. Unlike taking his mother hostage, Elena, standing a few feet away, watches in shock, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. Her eyes are wide, and her posture is stiff as she processes Aiden's unexpected action. Aiden, tears streaming down his face, clings desperately to Elena's leg as she tries to step out the door for groceries. His small hands grip tightly around her, his face contorted in distress and fear, unable to let go. Aiden becomes more aggressive and violent with his demands as the day went by. Elena, standing in the doorway with one foot already out, looks down at him with a mix of concern and hesitation. Her expression shows the internal struggle of wanting to comfort him while still needing to leave. That evening, Elena stands in front of a mirror, her gaze fixed on her reflection, tears welling up in her eyes as she silently questions her parenting decisions. Her face is filled with sorrow and uncertainty, her hand gently resting on the edge of the sink for support. The mirror reflects her emotional turmoil, highlighting the pain and self-doubt that she's experiencing. Her expression is one of quiet contemplation, as though she's searching for answers that aren't readily available. The next day, Aiden was again upon seeing the photo of Elena, and Thomas started smashing it in the living room, his face scrunched up in anger and frustration as he throws a photo frame to the floor, shattering the glass. His body is tense, arms flailing in rage, and his eyes are filled with a mix of tears and fury. The photo frame lies broken on the ground, the picture of Elena and Thomas barely visible through the cracked glass. Elena stands nearby, watching helplessly, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief at Aiden's outburst. Elena helplessly kneels on the floor, carefully picking up the broken glass from the shattered photo frame. Her expression is filled with regret and self-reproach, her lips trembling slightly as she whispers to herself, "What have I done?" The room around her suddenly felt so quiet, the aftermath of the chaos hanging in the air, and her posture is tense, as though weighed down by the guilt and responsibility of the situation. The next day, Aiden went to school. Aiden has an outburst at school when a teacher assigns him a project without consulting Elena first. He stands in the middle of the classroom, shouting at the teacher with an angry expression, his face red with frustration. His hands are clenched into fists, and his body is tense as he flips over his desk in a dramatic outburst. Papers and books scatter across the floor as the desk crashes down. The teacher, standing at the front of the class, looks taken aback, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. The other students in the background watch in silence, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Immediately, Elena was summoned to appear in school at the principal's office. Elena arrives, sits in the principal's office, her posture tense and defensive, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face is a mix of embarrassment and frustration as she listens to the teacher explain Aiden's disruptive behavior. Her eyes are downcast, avoiding the gaze of the teacher and principal, but her expression shows she is holding back emotions. The teacher stands in front of her, speaking with a calm but firm expression, while the principal sits at a desk, quietly observing the conversation. While this was going on, Aiden storms out of the school building, his face flushed with anger and defiance. His footsteps are quick and heavy, and papers fly from his backpack, trailing behind him as he pushes open the school doors. His expression is fierce, eyes narrowed, and his hands are clenched into fists. The papers scatter around him in the wind, creating a chaotic trail across the schoolyard. The next day, Elena went to the principal's office again. The teacher suggests therapy for Aiden. Elena sits in the principal's office, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her posture closed off and defensive. Her face is serious, and her brow furrows slightly as she listens to the teacher's suggestion of therapy for Aiden. There's a mix of concern and reluctance in her expression, as though she's grappling with the idea. The teacher, sitting across from her, leans forward slightly, speaking with a calm but earnest demeanor. The principal remains quietly at the desk, observing the conversation. The office is well lit with neutral tones, and educational materials are neatly arranged on the shelves. After the meeting, Elena walks along a quiet street back home, her posture slightly hunched, her gaze fixed ahead but distant, filled with internal conflict. She avoids looking at Aiden, her expression troubled and uncertain. Aiden, happily skipping beside her, is carefree and oblivious to her emotional turmoil, his face filled with joy and innocence. Elena bought a child therapy brochure to understand if the options are favorable to Aiden. The brochure for child therapy lies on Elena's kitchen table, untouched and slightly askew, as if it has been there for some time. The front cover features calming imagery of children and a comforting message, but the brochure remains closed and untouched, symbolizing the weight of an unresolved decision. Aiden begins isolating himself from everyone. Aiden sits alone at his desk in the classroom, his posture slouched and his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face is set in a frown, clearly refusing to join the group activity. His eyes are focused downward, avoiding the laughter and chatter of the other kids who are gathered at a nearby table, playing and interacting cheerfully. Elena secretly came to school to monitor Aiden's behavior. She stands outside the classroom, looking through the window with a troubled expression on her face. Her eyes are focused on Aiden, sitting alone at his desk, her face filled with guilt and sadness. Her hand rests lightly on the window pane, as if she wants to reach out but is unable to. Aiden, not knowing that his mother was watching, sits alone at a desk, his face twisted in frustration as he tears up a party invitation from a classmate. His eyes are narrowed, filled with a mix of defiance and sadness, as he mutters to himself, "I don't need anyone else." He shreds the invitation from the classmate. The pieces of the torn invitation flutter down onto the desk, the colorful design contrasting with Aiden's somber mood. The classroom around him is lively, with other students laughing and chatting, but Aiden is disconnected, his anger and loneliness evident. That night, Elena sits alone on the couch in the dimly lit living room, clutching Aiden's baby photo in her hands. Her gaze is soft but filled with overwhelming emotion as tears silently stream down her face. The photo, slightly worn, shows a much younger Aiden, innocent and carefree, evoking memories of better times. Elena's posture is slumped, her shoulders heavy with guilt and sadness, as she quietly reflects on the difficult and joyous journey she and Aiden have faced. A flashback scene captures a younger Elena holding little Aiden, looking at young Aiden with a conflicted expression. She also flashbacks when they cook and laugh together. He's misbehaving, perhaps throwing a toy or ignoring her instructions, while Elena hesitates to discipline him. Her face is filled with regret and uncertainty, as if she knows she's making the wrong choice but is too overwhelmed to act. Elena sits alone in a dimly lit room, her hand resting on her forehead as she whispers to herself, Maybe I've been too soft on him, but how do I change now? Her face is filled with a mix of self-doubt and frustration, her eyes slightly closed as if grappling with the weight of her thoughts. One sunny afternoon again, when Elena wanted to go out for a walk, Aiden stands firmly in front of the door, his small body tense with anger. His face is flushed red, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and rage as he shouts, "If you leave, I'll run away." His fists are clenched at his sides, and his posture is rigid, showing his determination to stop Elena. Elena is frozen in the background, her expression one of shock and sadness, torn between her need for space and the love she feels for Aiden. Elena was frustrated, confused, and disconnected from herself for a moment. As she stands in the doorway, her bag slipped from her hand, falling to the floor with a soft thud. Her face is a mixture of shock, fear, and guilt as she stares at Aiden, who is still blocking the door. Her posture is tense, caught in the agonizing moment between her need for space and her overwhelming fear for Aiden's well-being. Aiden then sits on the floor, his small body trembling with sobs as he cries hysterically. His face remains contorted in distress, tears streaming down his cheeks. He clutches Elena's scarf tightly in his hands, the fabric wrinkling as he grips it for comfort. Elena kneels beside him, her expression one of deep concern and tenderness. She gently rests her hand on his back, trying to soothe him as her other hand holds his trembling fingers, offering reassurance. Her face is filled with love and helplessness as she tries to calm him. Late in the night, Elena walks to Aiden's, and what she saw got her emotional. Aiden's bed was unmade, and on the desk, a crumpled note lies abandoned, its edges curled from being tightly squeezed. The note, partially visible, reads, "You are the only person I need. Don't leave me." The words written in a child's unsteady handwriting. Elena stands in Aiden's room, the crumpled note in her hands. Her face is stricken with guilt, her eyes wide with shock and sorrow as she reads the words, "Don't leave me, you are the only person I need." She holds the note tightly against her chest, as if trying to absorb the weight of her son's pain. Elena sits quietly by Aiden's bedside, her hand gently stroking his hair as he sleeps peacefully. Her face is filled with sorrow, the weight of her emotions evident in the soft lines of her expression. Her eyes are focused on Aiden's peaceful face, a mix of love and guilt in her gaze, as if she's silently apologizing for the pain she's caused. Elena is still unaware of what lies ahead. Up next in part 2. Elena sits up abruptly in her bedroom, her face a mix of confusion and unease as she wakes to see Aiden standing silently at the foot of her bed. His expression is unsettlingly calm, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that feels both eerie and deliberate. His posture is stiff, his hands resting at his sides. In another scene, Aiden stands in the center of a room, holding two small knives pointed at himself, his face contorted with desperation and raw emotion. Tears stream down his cheeks as he yells, "If you leave me, I'll hurt myself." His body is tense, his hands trembling as they grip the knife, the sharp edge glinting faintly in the muted light. The question is, what will you do as a mother? How far would you go to save someone you love? Well, just like any mother would risk her life, Elena knelt down, her face filled with sorrow and desperation, reached out toward Aiden, who stands defiantly in the foreground. Aiden's tear-streaked face twisted in anger and pain. What happens next? Don't guess, let's watch out for the part 2. Our shout out for today goes to Epigu Zoe. Thanks for commenting in our previous post. Hope you don't mind using your name for the character in the story as Elena's neighbor, Zoe. This video is dedicated to you.
Bound by shadows, the love from a caring mother.